What if the scariest people aren't in a movie, but in real-life case files that never got answers? Today we're looking at real stories across North America where the truth slipped through the cracks. These are cases with names, timelines, and evidence that went cold. Some suspects vanished, some leads dried up. All of them point to one thing: someone out there got away. He emptied his bank account, crossed countries in a hurry, and then was found steps from a hotel he never checked into. July 1996, Blair Adams, 31, leaves Surrey, British Columbia in visible distress. Over several days, he withdraws cash and valuables, tries to enter the US by ferry and is turned back, then makes it across the border, flies to Washington, D.C., and finally ends up in Knoxville, Tennessee. Hotel cameras capture him loitering in the lobby. He pays for a room with cash, walks out, and never uses the key. The next morning, he's found in the lot of an under-construction hotel across the interstate. Cash from 3 countries is scattered nearby. Investigators say his injuries point to a violent encounter, and the medical examiner lists a fatal injury as the cause. No robbery, no clear motive. A composite sketch is released of a man witnesses saw speaking with him outside a nearby restaurant, but nothing definitive follows. To this day, the timeline is crisp and the reason is foggy. Did Blair run from someone real or from a fear that spiraled as he crossed borders? The unanswered piece is the person he met in Knoxville that night. The case remains open. A bright orange fire lights up the water off Craig, Alaska, and with it a mystery that refuses to die. It is September 1982. The Investor, an $850,000 fishing boat, is seen burning near Craig. When responders reach the vessel, they find 8 people passed away on board. The owner and family were on that trip along with 4 crew members. The scene is devastating and confusing. Who set the boat ablaze? Who pulled the trigger before the fire? Witness accounts describe a suspicious person leaving the dock in a skiff that morning. A local man would eventually be put on trial and later acquitted. No one else has been convicted. There is no clear motive that ever stuck. And decades later, the official line from investigators is simple: the case is closed. The reality for locals is different. It remains the state's worst unsolved mass killing at sea and one of the most unsettling cold cases on the Pacific coast. Someone left that harbor and simply disappeared into the islands. A scientist writes 1 observation per minute. Then the pen goes quiet at 10 a.m. In September 1986, 28-year-old graduate researcher Jane Marie Pritchard drives to Blackbird State Forest in Delaware to study the hog peanut vine. She parks near the visitor center, steps into the trees with her gear, and does what she always does. She documents sunlight, leaf angle, and growth behavior. The entries roll in like clockwork. Then at 10 a.m., the notes end. Later that day, hikers spot her in the underbrush. A shotgun was used. Investigators quickly rule out a hunting accident and assemble a timeline built from interviews with squirrel hunters and other visitors. One man, Michael Lloyd, tells police he talked to Jane and saw her speaking with another man. His description leads to a composite sketch. Hair and fiber evidence is collected. Then technology catches up. Early DNA testing excludes Lloyd, and he is released after months in jail. The case moves to the cold case shelves, but not into oblivion. Detectives have said there is testable physical evidence still preserved. The path through the forest is short. The window of time is small. It is a solvable timeline if the right person speaks or if modern testing hits. First up, we have Ariel Castro, the Cleveland man whose sentence became one of the most infamous in modern American court history. For more than a decade, Castro kept 3 women trapped inside his home while their families, friends, and the public searched for answers. From the outside, the house looked like any other ordinary home on the street, which made the truth even more disturbing when it finally came out. When the women were rescued in 2013, the full horror of what had happened inside that house stunned the country. Castro later pleaded guilty to hundreds of charges, avoiding a trial, but not avoiding the consequences. The judge made sure there was no confusion about his future. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole, plus another 1,000 years, making it clear that there was no legal path for him to ever leave prison alive. Martin Bryant was the man behind one of Australia's darkest modern tragedies. In 1996, Bryant carried out a devastating attack at Port Arthur in Tasmania, a historic tourist site where people had simply gone for a normal day out. By the time it was over, 35 people had lost their lives and many others had been injured, leaving the entire country shaken. The case changed Australia forever and became one of the major turning points that led to some of the strictest gun reforms in the nation's history. In court, Bryant pleaded guilty and the judge handed down 35 life sentences, making sure each lost life was recognized in the punishment. Reports also list his sentence as including more than 1,000 additional years, all without possibility of parole. He remains one of Australia's most notorious prisoners, and his sentence was designed to guarantee he would never return to society. James Holmes was the man responsible for the 2012 movie theater attack in Aurora, Colorado, a case that horrified people because of how ordinary the setting was. People had gone out to a midnight screening expecting a fun night out, sitting in a dark theater with popcorn, friends, and families around them. Instead, the theater became the scene of absolute chaos. Holmes was eventually convicted and sentenced to 12 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, one for each person who lost their life that night. But the court did not stop there. He was also given an additional 3,318 years in prison for the many people he injured and endangered. The sentence was not just about keeping him locked away forever, it was also about making sure every victim, every survivor, and every person affected by that night was counted in the final judgment. Adnan Oktar was a Turkish cult leader and television preacher whose case sounds almost unreal when you first hear it. For years, he presented himself as a religious figure, author, and media personality, often appearing on television surrounded by followers while promoting a carefully crafted public image. But prosecutors argued that behind that image was something much darker, a powerful criminal organization built on control, fear, manipulation, and exploitation. His charges included leading a criminal gang, abuse, fraud, blackmail, and other serious crimes connected to his inner circle. The investigation involved a massive number of people, and the case became one of the most shocking legal stories in Turkey. After a retrial, he was sentenced to 8,658 years in prison. The number is almost impossible to process, but the scale of the sentence matched the scale of the allegations, with prosecutors describing years of harm hidden behind a polished public persona. Dudley Wayne Kaiser received a sentence that became one of the longest ever given for a single count. In Alabama, Kaiser was convicted after taking the lives of his wife, his mother-in-law, and a college student who was also present during the crime. The details of the case were so severe that the court did not treat the punishment as one single act with one single sentence. Instead, the judge separated the victims and made sure the punishment reflected the full weight of what had happened. Kaiser received 2 life sentences for 2 of the victims, but for the killing of his wife, the judge handed down a separate sentence of 10,000 years. That number was obviously not meant to be realistic in a human sense, it was meant to be final. It was the justice system's way of saying that even one lifetime in prison did not feel like enough for what he had done. A storm pounds Oahu, and a missing license triggers a theory that changes the whole case. January 1982, Lisa Au, a 19-year-old beautician, leaves dinner with her boyfriend in Honolulu and drives towards Kalaau. It is a rough night on the roads. The next morning, she does not show. Her family sounds the alarm, and they eventually find her car with the driver's window down and pooled rainwater inside. Her purse is on the seat, her license and registration are not in it. Weeks later, a jogger finds Lisa off a mountain road near Tantalus. Decomposition prevents a clear cause of death, and early theories point at a police impersonator because of the missing license. That angle burns bright until a simple fact surfaces. Lisa had used her license to write a check at a grocery store the evening she vanished and ended up leaving it there. Investigators look hard at the boyfriend. He cooperates and even takes lie detector tests, which he does not pass. He says guilt over not driving her home explains it. Witnesses recall a car on the mountain road around 2:30 a.m. with a man driving and a sleeping woman in the passenger seat. Later, the same car is seen again without the woman. That witness says no one followed up with her. The case stays open. The storm that night washed away more than footprints. It washed away a clear path to answers. Hours after a guilty verdict, a man writes a goodbye note and goes missing. On October 31st, 1990, a minor collision near a seaside park in Rhode Island sets off a chain of events that no one can take back. Adam C. Emery believes his car was struck. He and his wife confront another driver, Jason Bass, in a different vehicle. A confrontation escalates, Jason Bass is attacked, and he passes away. The legal fight is long. Emery turns down a plea deal and goes to trial. On October 10th, 1993, a jury finds him guilty of second-degree homicide. Formal sentencing has not happened yet, and he is allowed to remain free for the moment. That night, Emery and his wife leave notes, drive to Claiborne Pell Newport Bridge, and then vanish. Their car is found. Years later, a skull identified as his wife's is recovered from the water, but Adam is never found. In 2004, a court declares him legally dead, but sightings keep popping up. Florida, then Europe. Investigators say there is reason to think he survived and may have support abroad. The case sits at a strange intersection of courtroom finality and real-world uncertainty. If he is alive, he is one of the most notorious outstanding names from a New England case file. A friendly 19-year-old leaves a party, takes the path he always takes, but never makes it home. Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, August 28, 1999, Jason McCullough says goodbye to friends after a late-night get-together and starts the short walk to his parents' place. He chooses the usual cut-through at Highfield Park, a paved path surrounded by homes and apartments. Locals hear a single shot, footsteps scatter, and Jason is found on the path about an hour later. There is no robbery, there is no clear motive, no grudge anyone can point to. Police interview hundreds of people, release multiple composite sketches of men seen in the area, and later pursue a woman who may have been a key witness. Tips arrive, then slow to a trickle. Over the years, a reward program highlights the case. The park is renamed in Jason's memory, and an annual walk against violence keeps his name in the news. Investigators believe there were people nearby that night who know exactly what happened. They also believe the right conversation could still break the case. Jason's story is the kind that sticks with a community. It also shows how silence can outlast a headline. Two German travelers accept a ride in British Columbia and vanish from the road. Early October 1983, Andrea Scherpf and Bernd Gorik, visiting from Germany, are hitchhiking in British Columbia. A driver in an older pickup stops. Days later, the couple is found by Highway 97 near the Pine River. Their belongings are missing. Someone uses Andrea's traveler's checks to buy fuel at stations moving south through the province. Years pass before a strong lead surfaces. A local man, Andy Rose, is accused after a woman claims he confessed. He is convicted, appealed, and is convicted again, and then science steps in. DNA testing on clothing from the case does not match Rose. In a third trial, he is acquitted after almost a decade behind bars. Another man, Vance Hill, is later discussed after statements from his ex-wife, but nothing definitive ties him to the crime. Hill passes away in 1985. This case is still the kind that makes hitchhikers keep looking over their shoulder. The stops where the checks were used trace a path that feels personal and taunting. Someone knew those roads well and stayed one town ahead of the law. Darren Ben Alfred Anderson's case is remembered for one of the worst appeal outcomes imaginable. Anderson was convicted in Oklahoma for a brutal set of crimes involving an elderly woman, including kidnapping, robbery, and SA. His original sentence was already almost impossible to comprehend, 2,200 years in prison. For most people, that would have been the end of the story, because no human being could ever outlive that amount of time. But Anderson appealed the conviction and was granted a new trial. At first, that might sound like a legal victory. Instead, the second trial also ended in conviction, and the new sentence became dramatically worse. This time, he was sentenced to 11,250 years in prison. Guinness later listed it as the greatest amount of jail time added as a result of an appeal, turning his attempt to reduce his punishment into the exact opposite. So that's something nice. Alan Wayne McLaurin was Anderson's accomplice in that same Oklahoma case. McLaurin was convicted on multiple serious counts tied to the attack, and his sentence became one of the longest in American history. Court records later described his total term as 20,750 years, with the sentences stacked on after another. Even though the legal system still technically discussed parole eligibility, the court noted the obvious. With a sentence that long, he would die in prison unless something beyond normal human possibility happened. It is one of the clearest examples of a court turning years into a message. Charles Scott Robinson, who received what Guinness has recognized as the longest jail term given to a single person on multiple counts. In 1994, Robinson was convicted in Oklahoma for horrific crimes against a minor. The jury could not sentence him to life without parole, so they did the next most extreme thing. They recommended 5,000 years for each of the 6 counts. The judge accepted it, giving Robinson a total sentence of 30,000 years. The number was almost impossible to process, but the intention was simple. The jury wanted to make sure he would never be free again. Mehmet Adnan, the Turkish founder of Clifflick Bank, also known as Farm Bank. On the surface, it looked like an online farming game where people could invest in virtual livestock and then make real money. But authorities said it was actually a massive fraud scheme that pulled money from thousands of people before collapsing. In 2025, he and his brother were sentenced to 45,376 years and 6 months in prison. This case is different from the violent crimes on this list, but the damage was enormous. It shows how financial predators can ruin lives on a massive scale without ever even using a weapon. Chamoy Tipiaso, the woman often linked to the longest prison sentence ever officially recorded. In Thailand, she ran the Mae Chamoy Fund, a massive pyramid-style fraud operation that promised huge returns and pulled in thousands of victims, including people connected to powerful institutions. When the scheme finally collapsed, the court handed her and several associates a sentence of 141,078 years. That is insane, but the strangest part is that she did not actually serve anything close to that. Because of sentencing limits and restrictions under Thai law, she was released after only a fraction of the sentence. Still, on paper, her punishment remains one of the most extreme ever handed down.
This is a photo of a nun, a very special nun named Mariam Salacutis. She was a real-life killer nun, and she didn't just kill once, she was a full-on serial killer, and on top of that was involved in fraud and a whole list of other crimes. And she wasn't even just a nun, she was an abbess, the head of a group of nuns. I can't believe I've never heard of her till today. A real-life serial killing nun. Mariam was a Greek nun who ran a convent with a particularly sinister agenda. Starting in the 40s, she began targeting wealthy women, convincing them to join her convent under the guise of spiritual enlightenment. Once they were in, she and her associates would force them to donate their fortunes to the monastery, using extreme and brutal methods. She was accused of embezzling the donated funds, and in some cases, she'd kill the donors. By the time the authorities started closing in, she had amassed a huge amount of property, around 300 homes and farms, and a fortune in gold and jewels. An anonymous tipster, the daughter of one of the wealthy donors, alerted the police. She claimed her mother had been coerced into leaving her fortune to the monastery, and this set off a chain reaction of investigations. The FBI even got involved after a missing persons case linked to Solocutis' convent came up. The daughter of a Greek immigrant who had gone missing in 1949 was reportedly last seen in the convent. Oh, and this is a really messed up thing. Solocutis' convent was supposedly also a place where people suffering from tuberculosis were brought, under the false pretense of it being a sanatorium. The prosecution alleged that around 150 people died there because proper medical treatment was deliberately withheld. In 1950, over 85 police officers stormed her monastery grounds and arrested her. They also found a bunch of half-naked, malnourished, and sick elderly women tied up in the basement. The young man on the right in this photo is Ben Field. You'd never know by looking at this image, but he went on to kill the old man standing beside him, Peter Farquhar, a retired teacher and author. Ben Field was training to become a priest when he began a relationship with Peter Farquhar, and would later admit to spiking his drinks with illicit substances and hallucinogens simply to torment him and make Peter question his own sanity. According to Field, he did it for no other reason than it was cruel to upset and torment Peter purely out of meanness. These are Ben Field's exact words to the jury. In the end, he killed Peter by smothering him with a pillow when he was too weak to fight back. In 2019, Field was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 36 years. Things could have gone much worse though. He had a list of around 100 potential victims, including his very own family members and other elderly, vulnerable individuals. According to him, he wanted to kill 50 pensioners in a single night. This is a photo of Father Gerald Robinson, who carried out an incredibly brutal crime in 1980. On April 5th of that year, Sister Margaret Ann Paul, a 71-year-old Catholic nun, was found dead in the chapel at Mercy Hospital in Toledo, Ohio. She'd been strangled and stabbed 9 times in a pattern resembling an inverted cross. After this, she was covered and stabbed an additional 22 times. At the time of the killing, Father Gerald Robinson was one of the first individuals to arrive at the scene and preside over the mass for Sister Margaret Ann. At first, he wasn't suspected of anything, but as time went on, suspicions about Robinson began to grow. The real breakthrough in the case, though, came with advancements in DNA technology. In 2004, after years of investigations, Father Robinson was charged in the case and finally convicted in 2006. He spent the remainder of his life in prison and died there in 2014. This is Father Ryan Erickson. He looks a bit like Peter Griffin, but this guy's biggest sin wasn't just being the star of one of the most obnoxious cartoons ever put to screen. Instead, this man was downright evil. Sorry to all the Family Guy fans out there. I am just not into that show. Did I need to tell you that? Probably not. In February of 2002, Erickson took the lives of 2 men. The 2 men had been members of his church in Hudson, Wisconsin. They'd called him to a meeting to discuss some pretty serious allegations against him. The accusations included misconduct with a male juvenile and reports that Erickson had been giving intoxicants to minors. Erickson showed up with a firearm, firing at Dan O'Connell and the other man. As law enforcement began to close in on him, Erickson reportedly told a deacon at another church, "I done it, and they're gonna catch me." The Servant Girl Annihilator, the Austin Axe Killer, the Midnight Assassin, these were all names given to one of the earliest serial killers in the United States, an unidentified assailant who terrorized Austin, Texas between 1884 in 1885, 3 years before Jack the Ripper. The killer would attack his victims while they slept in their beds, hacking them up with an axe. The majority of his victims were mainly black women. The spree only stopped when additional police were hired to patrol the streets at night and residents formed their own vigilance committee. In total, the servant girl annihilator was responsible for 8 deaths. He also severely injured 6 other women and 2 men. But the killer was never caught or identified. There were all kinds of theories floating around at the time. Some local voodoo practitioners believed that he had the power of invisibility, because no dogs in the homes or surrounding areas where he'd attacked had barked. He seemed to just almost move entirely silently. And in 1888, after Jack the Ripper had killed Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes, another theory came about that the Austin Axe Killer and Jack the Ripper were actually the same guy. Carl Eugene Watts isn't a name that usually comes up in the lists of the worst American serial killers in history, but he's actually one of the most prolific. Born in 1953 in Killeen, Texas, Watts began his spree in 1974. He'd kidnap his victims from their homes and torment them for prolonged periods before finally killing them, usually by strangulation, bludgeoning, or drowning. Most of his victims were young white women, who he described later in court as having, quote, evil eyes. He'd attack in different jurisdictions, often crossing into different states. He became known as the Sunday Morning Slasher and operated for about 8 years before finally being caught. Police weren't able to connect him to every killing he was suspected of carrying out, which could be over 100, but he did receive a life sentence, dying in prison of prostate cancer in 2007. On December 13, 1990, a lady of the night, Mary Lou Pratt, was found dead in the Oak Cliff neighborhood in Dallas. She'd been killed with a firearm. But the most disturbing part, both of her eyes had been carefully removed. Then just 2 months later, another woman of the night, Susan Peterson, was found dead just outside of Dallas. Once again, her eyes had been carefully surgically removed. There was obviously a pattern now, and the assailant became one of the most wanted criminals in the state. Finally, just 1 month later, a third woman was found dead, lying on her side near a school. Once again, no eyes. A major breakthrough in the case came when a woman tipped off the police about a man named Charles Frederick Albright, who was known to have a strange fascination with eyes, and he'd also known the first victim, Mary Lou Pratt. A number of other courtesans said that Albright had been violent with them, so this was enough to get a search warrant. In Albright's home, police found that he'd removed the eyes from several photographs and dolls. He also had a history with the law going back to when he was just a teenager, mostly for robbery. He was only ever tied to one of these killings officially, but it's pretty clear he was responsible for all 3. He was sentenced to life without parole and died in prison in 2020. Dean Corll, aka the Candyman. He operated between 1970 and 1973, known to have killed a minimum of 28 young men in Houston and Pasadena. He'd lure his victims by offering them a ride, or he'd invite them to a party. Now, it's easy to say don't get into a car with a stranger, but the thing is, Corll would acquaint himself with a number of his victims before picking them up and taking them to his home, where he'd torment and kill them. And if he didn't know them himself, they'd be friends or acquaintances of his accomplices. Yeah, he didn't operate alone. He had 2 young men, David Owen Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley, helping him. Once his victims were in his home, he'd give them various substances until they'd pass out, then he'd handcuff them to his bed, have his way with them, or torment them until finally taking their lives. Sometimes this would be drawn out for days. Well, it finally came to an end when one of his accomplices, Elmer Wayne Henley, grabbed Corll's firearm and turned it on him. Henley told him, "You've gone far enough, Dean. I can't go on any longer. I can't have you kill all my friends." Corll began stepping towards Henley, daring him to shoot, not believing he would, but Henley did. Corll tried to run out of the room, but Henley fired 3 more times, killing him instantly. Good riddance. Janine Jones was a nurse who worked with young patients, and this makes her case incredibly disturbing because a nurse is just the last person you'd be expecting to intentionally cause you harm. She's believed to have caused the deaths of around 60 young patients between 1970 and 1982. She did this by administering unneeded substances like dioxin and heparin into her patients. She started her career at Bexar County Hospital in San Antonio, but people started getting suspicious when a larger than normal number of young patients were dying under her care. Now, instead of reporting her, the hospital just quietly kind of let her go to avoid bad publicity and potential lawsuits, which is insane. Then Jones found a job at a pediatrician's clinic in Kerrville. Luckily, her suspicious behavior didn't go unchecked there, though. A doctor discovered she had been accessing dangerous amounts of succinylmethonium chloride. Eventually, in 1985, she was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. This video comes from Reddit user Katie201105, who was driving with her boyfriend when they came about 2 inches from hitting whatever this thing is. Katie said it wasn't a deer or a dog, nothing they'd ever seen in their life. Here it is zoomed in a bit. Now, watching closely, you'll notice the thing seems to suddenly appear. So as the car ahead drives by, the thing just kind of materializes. Now, as for what it is, I don't know. It doesn't look like any deer I've ever seen. A lot of commenters say it looks like a skinwalker or a rake. Whatever it is, it doesn't look right. Reddit user No Stairway Denied was working as a cashier at a grocery store when she had an encounter that stuck with her for years. A woman came through her line, normal looking, well dressed. Nothing unusual. She bought a couple things, handed over her payment, and the Redditor turned to put the money in the register, like she'd done 1,000 times before. When she turned back with her change from her receipt, she told the customer to have a nice day, and that's when the woman's eyes changed. They looked completely different, as if she'd lifted some invisible shutter. Her face still looked polite, but her eyes, it was like they weren't human anymore. In No Stairway's words, they looked pure evil. The customer immediately noticed the startled reaction on her face and smiled, entertained by how terrified she'd made her, almost like she'd done it on purpose. But then the woman blinked, and just like that, her eyes looked normal again. She nodded, still smiling, and walked off like nothing happened. The Redditor went straight to customer service to ask for a break. In the smoking room, she sat, shaking, trying to process what she'd seen. The more she thought about it, the more she felt like she hadn't been looking at a normal person at all. Her only conclusion, that woman was something evil. And what disturbed her most was how the mysterious woman seemed to want her to see it, like she was relishing and scaring her. Our next story comes from a now deleted Reddit user who had a bone-chilling encounter with what she called a possessed patient. I worked in a hospital years ago and was taking care of someone. He was young, early 20s. I wouldn't say that he wasn't human, but I definitely think he was possessed by something that wasn't. During an encounter, he made a face at me and growled. His entire face distorted into something our faces just can't and don't do. I thought it was just me who saw it, but there were 2 staff members behind me at the time, and it happened, and they both took several steps back when he did it. His face distorted into a demon. I don't know how else to describe it. His brows arched, his eyes turned black, his smile spread to his ears. No one talked about it until I brought it up to one of my colleagues at the end of the day. She just looked at me and said, "I've been working in this field for over 30 years, and I've never seen anything like that in my life. I believe the help he needs is a bit beyond us. Be careful with that one." Alright, this next one is a lot more subtle, but it's just got this eerie vibe about it. It comes from Redditor CheesecakeLow2879, who said that about a week after they moved into their apartment, someone knocked on their door. It was a tall man in a suit, wearing a long black coat, holding a briefcase. What threw them off was the way the man leaned in. Instead of bending forward like a normal person, he kind of tilted sideways, almost unnaturally, and he handed out a leaflet. The leaflet seemed to be about funeral planning or something like that. The man then gave the Redditor this unnerving smile and asked, "Have you thought about your future?" There was this uneasy tension in the air now, and the Redditor just wanted this interaction to end. So they told him, "No thank you," and shut the door. Still a little freaked out, they put their eye up to the peephole, and this is the part that really gets me. Instead of walking away, the man just stood there in the hallway, staring at their door with that unsettling grin plastered on his face. He stood there for about 3 minutes before finally making his way back down the hall. A few days later, the Redditor spotted the man walking walking down the street again. That was the last time they ever saw him. The whole encounter, the strange posture, that unnatural smile, the fact that he just stood there staring at the door, it made the user think of something trying to imitate a person, but not quite getting it right. Have you ever heard of the black-eyed children? Maybe sitting in a parking lot late at night when suddenly you hear a tap on your window. Maybe you'll wake up in the middle of the night to a knock at your door and there they are, usually politely asking for directions. They're kind of pale maybe, but aside from that, they look like regular kids. It's only when you really look at them that you notice their eyes. Pure black from lid to lid, no whites at all. Stories about them have been floating around for years, and almost everyone who tells one of these stories says the same thing. They felt this sudden wave of dread. Most trace the whole legend back to 1996, when Texas reporter Brian Bethel wrote about two kids he met in Abilene. He said their skin looked pale, their eyes were completely black, and something about the encounter left them all shaken up. Another one of the more well-known stories comes from Vermont. It was a snowy evening when an elderly couple heard 3 loud knocks at their door. They opened it. 2 children stood there, a boy and a girl. "Parents will be here soon. May we come in?" they asked. The couple let them inside. They were innocent children, after all. The kids sat on the couch while the wife made some hot cocoa for them. The husband tried asking questions, but they didn't really answer. That's when the wife noticed their cat was acting strangely, hissing and growling at the children. Then the boy asked, "May we please use the restroom?" The wife looked at them more closely for the first time, and that's when she saw their eyes, which she described as black as a starless universe. She directed them to the bathroom, though, and turned back to her husband. He was now covering his face with his hand. When she asked what was going on, he showed her blood running from his nose. Before she could react, power cuts out. The wife starts making her way down the hall to the bathroom, and that's when she hears a voice, which whispered at the end of the hall, "Her parents are here." The children then left, leaving the door wide open behind them. Outside, she noticed 2 tall, slender men at the end of her driveway. She waved. They didn't wave back. The men and the children then drove away together, and in the days that followed, 3 of their 4 cats disappeared. The 4th was found dead, and the husband suffered ongoing nosebleeds that led to a diagnosis of aggressive skin cancer. Joe Ball became known as the Butcher of Elmendorf and the Alligator Man. This case goes back to the 1930s in Texas. Joe Ball was a former soldier who turned to bootlegging after World War I and later opened a saloon when Prohibition ended. And behind his saloon, he kept a pond with 6 alligators, where he would sometimes feed them live cats and dogs for entertainment purposes. That's already evil on its own, but it seems it just wasn't satisfying Joe Ball's thirst for cruelty, because things went even further. Women in the area, including his very own wife, began to disappear. In 1938, 2 county sheriffs came to question Ball about the missing women, and he panicked, ending his own life with a pistol. After Ball's death, his handyman Clifford Wheeler came forward and confessed to helping Ball dispose of the bodies of 2 women by feeding them to his alligators. It's suspected that Ball may have been responsible for the deaths of up to 20 women. Thank God this next guy was put to death. Anthony Allen Shore, a complete and utter sicko. He mainly operated in Houston, forcing himself on several young women and girls between 1986 and 1995. He would strangle his victims before dumping their bodies. He wasn't investigated until 1998, when he was convicted of harming his own 2 daughters. He was required to provide DNA to authorities, who were then able to link him to victims of his then unsolved crimes. After 11 hours of interrogation, Shore had given authorities everything they needed. It took the jury less than an hour to decide to put Anthony Allen Shore to death, and in 2004, he was put down by lethal injection. Edward Harold Bell was born in 1939 in southern Texas. He was responsible for a long list of disturbing crimes, but most notably for having killed 11 girls throughout Houston, Galveston, Webster, and Dickinson between 1971 in 1977. He revealed these crimes in 1998 in a series of letters, which he sent to prosecutors in Galveston and Harris counties. The cases had been unsolved at the time, and the details Bell outlined matched the circumstances of the cases. The first killing Bell detailed took place in 1971. He killed 2 girls in Galveston. Debbie Ackerman and Maria Johnson, dumping their remains close to a deserted bridge. The two had been reported missing after accepting a ride from a man in a white van. At the time, Bell had owned a white van. Bell was never convicted for any of the killings he detailed in these letters, but he was already in prison for having killed a Marine named Larry Dickens, who had been attempting to restrain him after having flashed several young women from inside his car. And it's worse than that, but I can't really go into details here, nor would I really want to. Now, he'd actually managed to escape this incident and was a wanted fugitive. He wasn't caught until an episode of Unsolved Mysteries aired about the case, and someone who knew Bell tipped off the police. Angel Resendez, aka the Railroad Killer, was on the FBI's most wanted fugitives list before finally surrendering to Texas authorities on July 13th of 1999. He carried out at least 23 killings while train hopping across the southern US and Mexico between 86 and 99. Resendez would hop on freight trains traveling from one place to another and would often target people living near railway tracks. He would break into homes or attack people he encountered, leaving just a trail of violence in his wake. And what made Resendez particularly dangerous was his ability to evade capture, because he was constantly moving and crossing state lines. Law enforcement agencies across different states really struggled to coordinate and apprehend him. And an extra creepy thing about him was that he liked getting to know his victims after killing them, usually looking at their driver's licenses and other forms of ID, and then taking sentimental items from their homes. He was a real creep. His reign of terror finally ended in 1999, and he died of lethal injection in Huntsville, Texas in 2006. The Phantom of Texarkana, the Phantom Killer, the Phantom Slayer. He has many monikers, but his real identity is still a complete mystery. The Phantom Killer stalked young couples in the Texarkana region between February 22nd and May 3rd of 1946. Each attack targeted young couples in isolated spots on weekend nights. The attacks occurred every 3 to 4 weeks. In the first attack on February 22nd, Jimmy Hollis and Mary Jean Larry were parked in a secluded area when a man wearing a white cloth mask approached them. He ordered them out of the car, hit Jimmy on the head with a firearm, and forced himself on Mary using the barrel of his firearm. Luckily, both Jimmy and Mary survived this attack. In the second attack on March 24th, Richard Griffin and Polly Ann Moore were found dead in Griffin's car. They'd been shot outside the car and then placed back inside. The third attack on April 14th involved Paul Martin and Betty Jo Booker. Martin was found shot multiple times. Booker was found shot twice, both with the same type of pistol used in the previous attack. The final attack on May 3rd resulted in the deaths of Virgil and Katie Starks in their home. Katie had actually taken 2 bullets to the face, but had managed to run out of the home and get help. That was the last attack, but not because the assailant was caught. For some reason, he just stopped. The case has never been solved.
Moving right along, we have Ahmed Siraji, an Indonesian serial killer known as the Black Magic Killer. His killings began in 1986 after he claimed his late father appeared to him one night in a dream and demanded that Ahmed kill no less than 70 women. For the next 13 years, Ahmed was hell-bent on completing the task. He practiced witchcraft and lured many of his victims in with the promise that his magic would solve all of their problems. He brought them to a field and buried them up to the waist, which he told them was all part of his magical process. It wasn't. He killed them by forcibly restricting their airways, and after they died, he drank their spit before burying them completely. When he did this, he made sure the heads of the women always pointed towards his home. He believed that the placement of his victims along with the consumption of the women's saliva enhanced his powers. I don't know about all of that, but it for sure enhanced his psycho, in my opinion. In 1998, police discovered some of Ahmed's victims in the field, and he was arrested and convicted of 42 killings. One of his 3 wives, who were all sisters by the way, were arrested as well for being an accomplice to the killings. She was sentenced to life in prison while Ahmed was sentenced to death. In 2008, Ahmed was executed by firing squad. Much like Ahmed, they showed no mercy.
Alright, the next despicable prick on our list is Christopher Lee Watts. Pretty sure this guy could make anyone's stomach churn. A man who took the life of not just his wife, but his daughters as well. His totally innocent, trusting daughters who couldn't see a bad bone in their father's body. And on the outside, nobody else could either. Watts seemed like an upstanding, everyday, suburban family man, but that wasn't the case. Most of you know how the story goes. It was so shocking that people were completely horrified and dumbfounded. This became one of the most talked about criminal cases in recent history. And what sets this one apart is all the video footage we have, not just of the police questioning Watts right after he disposed of his entire family, not just the interrogation footage, but the footage of the everyday, seemingly happy parts of the Watts family's life as well before this whole incident. Like, how could this man, who seemed to have it all, a nice home, beautiful wife, 2 great daughters, how could he decide to end all of their lives just to start a new one with a different woman? It's as disturbing as it gets.
Next up, we have Yang Jinhai, a Chinese serial killer who was responsible for a lot of deaths. In 1988 and again in 1991, Yang was sentenced to labor camps for theft. In 1966, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison for attempting to violate a young woman. He served 3 years before eventually being released in 1999. Bad idea. For the next 4 years, Yang killed at least 67 people and violated at least 23 women. Commonly, Yang would enter family homes in the dead of night and then kill each family member one by one, using axes, hammers, and shovels, and on many occasions he would violate the women in the family before ending their lives as well. His motive, other than being a sick piece of shite, revenge, because his girlfriend had broken up with him after learning about his theft and attempted violation charges. He blamed society, and because he was walking garbage, he took his anger out on those in positions he craved, married men and women along with their daughters and sons. He was eventually arrested on November 3rd of 2003 and was sentenced to death by a firing squad. The execution took place on February 14th of 2004 and was most likely incredibly painful, but nobody feels bad about that.
Finally, we have a complete and total creep, as if the rest of the people on this list weren't. Issei Sagawa. This guy is most infamous for the killing of Renee Hardevelt in Paris in 1981. He didn't just take her life though, he also ate parts of her body. After being found unfit for trial by French medical experts in '83, Sagawa was sent to a psychiatric institution, but he was deported to Japan in 1984, where, to the shock of many, he was declared sane by Japanese authorities. French authorities had apparently failed to provide the necessary case files, so Sagawa just kind of walked. And not only did he escape incarceration, but he also went on to write a memoir titled In the Fog, where he recounted the details of his crime in detail. Very icky story.
Starting off our list today, we have Henry Lee Lucas, a disgusting man with a sordid past who was released from prison after serving time for killing his mother, only to violate 2 other young women, only to get arrested again, and then released, and then go on to kill an undisclosed number of people before being arrested for the final time. The late 90s were an embarrassing time for the law. Lucas was born in a small town in Texas. At a young age, his father died, and so he was raised solely by his mother, who just so happened to be a woman of the night, which just so happened to be the type of women that Lucas would go on to target later in his own life. In 1960, he killed his mother and was sentenced to serve 20 to 40 years in prison, but of course he only served 10, and in 1970, he was back on the streets. A year later, in 1971, he was arrested after being caught violating a young woman, and he was sent back to prison. Until just 6 years later, in 1957, that is, when the man with a clear history of violent tendencies and erratic behavior was released for a second time. And what did he do with his newfound freedom? He killed women. How many? No one knows. Because although the courts were only able to prove 3 killings at the hand of Lucas, including his mother's, Lucas himself claims to have taken the lives of more than 350 people. He's dead now, died in 2001, so we don't have to worry about him getting out again and killing more people, but I feel like no one should have had to worry about that in the first place, which they wouldn't have if he had been kept behind bars where he so very clearly belonged. Another person who should have never seen the light of day after the cell door slammed shut on his face the first time is Ted Bundy. Yep. For those of you who don't know Ted Bundy, or do know him but don't know him, you might be surprised to learn that not only did the police let Ted Bundy go, they also let him get away. twice. Ted Bundy's crime spree, as far as anyone knows, began on January 4th of 1974 when he brutally attacked a young woman, leaving her with permanent brain damage. Just 1 month later, on February 1st, Bundy claimed his first life, and 4 months later, on July 14th, he claimed 2 more. After that, he moved from Washington to Utah before claiming 2 more lives on November 8th of 1974. In January of 1975, he claims another life in Colorado, and in August of the same year, he is finally arrested for the very first time. But there's no sufficient evidence linking him to the crimes, and so he is released. 2 months later, he is picked out of a police lineup, and in March of 1976, he is convicted for forcibly taking a woman without her consent. But then, of course, the following year, he escapes and is brought back into custody, only to escape one more time. This time he kills 3 more women. In February, Bundy is apprehended for the last time and confesses to killing at least 36 women. Although he was only tried for the deaths of 2 women, he was found guilty and sentenced to death by electric chair, a sentence carried out on January 24th of 1989. Next up, we have Edmund Kemper, the co-ed killer who claimed the lives of 9 women, including his mother and grandmother, and 1 man, his grandfather. The first to meet their fates at the hands of Kemper were his grandparents, who he killed on August 27th of 1964. He was mad at them for taking away his weapons after he used them to kill birds and other small animals. In retaliation, he killed his grandparents. He confessed to the killings and was sent to a maximum security facility for the mentally ill, but in 1969, at the age of 21, he was released, and despite doctors' recommendations that he should not be living in close proximity with his mother, given both of their violent pasts, he went to live with his mother. He applied for a job as a state trooper, but was rejected due to him being severely overweight. He was, however, given a training school badge and handcuffs, and was given permission to borrow one of the officer's weapons. Eventually, Kemper began working for the highway department, which led him to noticing a large amount of hitchhikers in the area. At first, he would pick up female hitchhikers and let them go, but eventually, he stopped letting them go. He killed 6 female hitchhikers between 1971 and 1973, and then he killed his mother. After killing his mother, Kemper called a friend of hers and asked her to come over too, and he killed her. On April 23rd of 1973, he called into the Santa Cruz police station and confessed to his crimes. He was charged with 8 counts of first-degree killing and given 8 consecutive life sentences. Next up, we have Jack Unterweger, an Austrian-born serial killer who was arrested for killing and indecent assault in Austria before being released and moving to LA to carry out the rest of his criminal career. In 1990, after being released from prison in Austria, a woman began going missing in the area in which Unterweger lived, and authorities became suspicious. It was then that he left his former life behind and headed for the hills of LA. In 1991, while staying at the Cecil Hotel in Los Angeles, Unterweger began posing as a journalist working on a story about the red light district. During his time, he became well known in the city and even built relationships with law enforcement working on Skid Row. Also during this time, he was killing women of the night. At least 3 women died in LA at the hands of Unterweger. They were found dead in alleys surrounding the hotel with their undergarments tied around their necks, an Unterweger signature. In 1992, Unterweger was arrested after local police had been notified of his crimes by federal agents. He was extradited to Austria, tried, convicted, and sentenced to death, a moot point, however, seeing as he killed himself just hours after the sentence hearing ended. Next up, we have Gary Ridgway, who was let go after being questioned, after which he was taken in for a polygraph test and let go again, after which he provided police with a DNA sample and was again let go. While the exact number of women killed by Ridgway is unknown, what is known is that his first victim to be discovered was Wendy Caulfield, who was found floating in Seattle's Green River in July of 1982. In the weeks that followed, 4 more bodies were discovered in the same place, and then on August 15th of that same year, 3 more. The next day, police set up a task force to investigate the killings. It wasn't until the following year, however, that Ridgway first became a suspect, after being the last one seen with a lady of the night who, shortly after being seen with Ridgway, turned up dead in the river. Police questioned Ridgway in his home, but he denied everything and did his best to hide the scratches he had received not long before his run-in with the law. After the interview, Ridgway suggested that he take a polygraph test. which he passed somehow. Feeling cocky, he later offered up a sample of his DNA, and although the DNA was a match for 3 of the crime scenes, it wasn't able to be properly processed at the time Ridgway offered it up, and so he remained free for another decade, during which time he maintained a low profile. On November 30th, however, of 2001, Ridgway was arrested, after which he said, "I've killed so many women, I have a hard time keeping them straight." Despite the belief that the total women who died at the hands of Ridgway might be close to 90, he was only given 49 life sentences, but that may change because in 2023, yet another victim of Ridgway's was identified by police, so there is an ongoing investigation and I'm sure a trial will come.
This bizarre story comes from a now deleted Reddit user. I'll just call this one No Toenails. They write, "I worked as a receptionist at a hotel, and I remember one time around Christmas and New Year's, there was this very strange man staying at the hotel. He'd always stand and talk to me every night for hours in a stilted, bizarre manner, saying things like he was best friends with Princess Diana, that he worked on top secret robotics products, and that he worked with machinery 100 years advanced of our current technology. I thought the guy was mentally ill. Gave me very strange vibes and really creeped me out. And one day he started saying that he was in fact the robot that he'd built himself. He was saying things about how he wasn't a human and how he learned everything from observing and listening and talking to real humans. I was like, okay, this guy's off his meds or whatever. Not unusual to see crazy people in this hotel, so I was pretty used to it, to be honest. Then he started talking about how the only way people ever found out he was not a human was because he didn't have any toenails. Well, on New Year's Eve, he came out of his room in his pajamas, with no shoes or socks on, and sure enough, his feet were smooth like plastic. His toes were pristinely clean, and he had no toenails. It wasn't prosthetic feet or anything, just totally smooth skin with no toenails at all. His skin all over was perfect, not a spot or scar or freckle or wrinkle. And the guy otherwise had the appearance and demeanor of someone in their 70s, but the supple skin of a 17-year-old. Thinking about this guy still creeps me out to this day. And if anyone I've ever met in my life was a non-human entity, this guy was it. Some people have woken up to find someone, more like something, standing in their room. It's tall, completely dark, and always wears a wide-brimmed hat and a trench coat. It's known as the Hat Man, a shadowy figure with no face. He stands in corners, at doorways, or lurks in closets, watching silently while you just lie there frozen. The sight of him can be terrifying enough to feel like the breath is being pressed out of your body. Reports of the Hat Man began spreading online in the late 2000s. A blog called the Hat Man Project collects people's accounts, and the figure has even made it into documentaries. Now, similar shadowy figures have appeared in stories all over the world from all across history. Sleep paralysis demons. But why do so many people see this particular figure, a man with a wide-brimmed hat? Could there be more to these Hat Man stories than just cases of sleep paralysis? And back in 2014, a Reddit user named LordQuas187 was riding through Minneapolis with a car full of friends. They were heading down to Lake Street in a packed Honda Pilot when the group stopped at a red light. Everything was normal until someone in the back suddenly yelled, "What the F is that thing?" All of them turned to look. Moving along the sidewalk was a woman unlike anything they'd ever seen. Her skin looked so dark it didn't seem real. He described it like her whole body had been coated in Venta black. Her hair was all wild and tangled, her clothes were nothing but torn rags, and the way she moved. She wasn't walking so much as crawling, twisting along the ground, her limbs bending in angles no one's arms or legs should make. At one point, she slowly turned her head toward their car. He said her eyes looked like pure chaos, like something completely unhinged. Everyone started screaming. The second the light turned green, they just floored it. Some of the girls cried for almost 20 minutes afterward. The guys were shaken too, and even though none of them keep in touch anymore, Redditor swears that if he ran into any of them today and mentioned that woman on Lake Street, they'd all give the same answer. They thought they saw a demon.
Today we have Harold Shipman, aka Dr. Death. He was, as the name implies, a doctor practicing in the UK between the years 1972 and 1998. During his time as a physician, Shipman developed a great fondness for two things: pethidine, a synthetic opiate, and death. Not his death, of course, but the death of his patients. During his time in the medical field, Shipman caused the deaths of at least 218 patients, but the real number is likely much higher. He ended their lives by administering lethal doses of morphine, and for a long time his reign of terror went unnoticed. It wasn't until his addiction to substance abuse came to light that he was suspected to also have an addiction to killing. Based on the sheer number of patients who were just dropping dead in his care, hospital staff finally came to the realization that something was just not right. He was arrested after the daughter of one of his victims caught him trying to write a will for the victim, claiming him as the beneficiary. He got too greedy. He was convicted in 2000 and died in 2004 after taking his own life in prison. The motive for his crimes remains unknown, but many people have speculated that he took the lives of those he personally saw as being a burden to society, which makes the way he died pretty fitting if you ask me.
Next on the list we have Nanny Doss. Nanny Doss was given the nickname the Giggling Granny, and when you hear about what she did, that nickname is gonna take on a much more sinister tone than, it might sound. Nanny Doss appeared to be this loving and caring woman, but beneath her friendly facade, there was something much darker. Over the course of several decades, Doss committed a string of killings. She poisoned 4 husbands, her own mother, sister, and even her grandchildren. Her method of choice? Poison. Doss used deadly substances like arsenic and rat poison to carry out her crimes, all while maintaining this outwardly nurturing persona that kept suspicion at bay for years. I mean, who on earth would suspect a sweet old granny of taking the lives of her own family members? It's just icky. It wasn't until 1954 that authorities began to unravel the truth behind the deaths that seemed to follow Doss wherever she went. Traces of poison were discovered in the victims' bodies, leading to Doss's eventual arrest. In 1955, Nanny Doss pleaded guilty to having taken the life of her 5th husband and was handed a life sentence behind bars. But her tale didn't end there. In 1963, she shocked the world once again by confessing to her other crimes, providing chilling details about her methods. Doss spent the remainder of her days confined to a prison cell. She died in 1965.
Next up, we have H.H. Holmes, yet another really bad dude. A pharmacist who purchased a hotel only to turn it into a mansion, only to use that mansion as a gruesome playground designed to inflict enormous amounts of mental and physical pain and distress on anyone unlucky enough to walk through its doors. It was affectionately referred to as the Killing Castle. The building was equipped with trapdoors, gas chambers, and a basement crematorium. The exact number of people who died at the hands of H.H. Holmes is unknown, but the numbers are said to be in the hundreds. Holmes himself claimed to have ended the life of 27 individuals, but only 9 were confirmed by law enforcement. I feel like I'm leaning towards the hundreds for this guy. I mean, he took the trouble of converting an entire 3-story building into some kind of disturbing torture chamber. Yeah, I can't say that word either.
Next up, we have one of the creepiest cult leaders in history, Roch Thériault. Roch Thériault was the twisted leader of a cult known as the Anthill Kids, which he founded in Canada in 1977. Under his manipulation, Thériault's followers were convinced that he possessed divine powers and that they would be the chosen survivors of an impending apocalypse. Eventually, the group isolated themselves from the outside world, creating a closed, secretive community behind the guise of spiritual enlightenment. Roch subjected his followers to extreme physical and psychological torment. He enforced strict and very bizarre rules, becoming increasingly erratic in his behavior over time. He became more violent and controlling, inflicting harm on his followers in the name of discipline and purification. Some cult members even went through waking amputations. This guy actually claimed to possess magical powers that he believed could reattach severed limbs. His reign of terror eventually resulted in the death of one of his many wives. He was arrested, but somehow got a light sentence, and after his release, he went right back to doing what he was doing before and was rearrested. He died in prison at the hands of another inmate.
Something smells fishy. Albert Fishy. Well, actually Albert Fish. I'm gonna stop now. Albert Fish was a man of many names, among them the Brooklyn Vampire, the Moon Maniac, the Werewolf of Wisteria, the Gary Man, the Boogeyman, you get it, man. Fish was a terrible person, as are all of the people on this list. His crimes consisted of stealing, violating, killing, and eating young men and women. When he was caught, he actually admitted that he would drink young people's BLOOD and make their body parts into stew. He was disgusting and seriously in the head. Again, like everyone else on this list. At one point during his crime spree, he actually sent a letter to the mother of one of his young victims detailing his crimes and how it had taken him 9 days to consume the corpse. This guy makes me sick. He was found guilty of killing 3 young people, although he claimed the number to be closer to 100. He died via electric chair on January 16th of 1936 at the age of 65. Thank God, good riddance, burn in hell.
Bradford Bishop. Worst thing about this guy is that he's still out there. I mean, he'd be about 88 years old now, so there's a good chance that he's dead. And he wouldn't be much of a threat now anyway, at that age, but his crime was so severe, it's just maddening that he never had to face the consequences. A former Foreign Services officer for the United States, Bishop decided to carry out a heinous crime on March 1st of 1976. Apparently, he'd been disappointed over not receiving a promotion at work. After informing his secretary that he wasn't feeling well, he left the office early, stopped at a bank, took out cash, then went to the hardware store. He bought a pitchfork, a shovel, and a can of gasoline, which is not suspicious in the slightest. Got back home around 8 p.m. and proceeded to take the lives of his wife, his mother, and his 3 sons. Afterward, he drove their bodies to a secluded wooded swamp, set them on fire before vanishing without a trace. This clip is from a BBC documentary filmed in 1978, part of one of the most well-known paranormal cases ever, the Enfield poltergeist. A reporter named Rosalind Morris visited the Hodgson family in Enfield, London, and interviewed them multiple times. This clip shows Janet Hodgson, who was just a kid at the time, speaking in this deep, harsh voice she claimed belonged to a spirit named Bill.
No. Who's there?
The Hodgsons said it started small. They'd hear knocking sounds, furniture would move around by itself, but then things started to get out of hand. Objects started flying across the room. Janet and her sister Margaret would get yanked out of bed. Janet started speaking in that raspy voice. Eventually, famed paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren showed up, and they backed the family up, saying the house was haunted by a poltergeist. Alright, one of the most uncomfortable and frustrating interviews I've ever seen is this Jim Carrey one. Oof. Now again, possessed in the traditional sense, no, but was he in some kind of state? Definitely. And it's hard to watch. It's very, very weird. So during a red carpet event at New York Fashion Week in 2017, Kat Sadler from E! News was trying to, just do her job, have a normal chat with Jim Carrey, who seemed to just be going out of his way to make things uncomfortable. There's no meaning to any of this, he said. I wanted to find the most meaningless thing that I could come to and join, and here I am. Sadler tried to keep things on track, mentioning that the party was celebrating icons, and then he's like, I don't believe in icons, I don't believe in personalities, I believe that peace lies beyond personalities, beyond invention and disguise, beyond the red S you wear on your chest that makes bullets bounce off. And to really drive the existential dread home, he finishes off with, this world is not our world, we don't matter. Okay, it's so pretentious. It's like a teenager who just had their first philosophy class and suddenly thinks they're just so above it all. I know the truth, I see everything for what it really is. I don't know what Jim Carrey was going through at this point, but I think luckily he's become a bit more normal again, I think. I don't know. In 2012, a woman named Latoya Amons in Gary, Indiana claimed her house was infested with demons. She said her kids were getting possessed. One kid apparently levitated, another walked backwards up a hospital wall. And it wasn't just her saying these things. Multiple people, like doctors, nurses, police officers, DCS workers, claimed they saw really weird things happen. The case ended up getting so much attention that it reached the local police and the church, and that's when a priest named Father Michael Maginot performed multiple exorcisms, one of which was reportedly sanctioned by the Catholic Church itself. Zach Baggins from Ghost Adventures eventually bought the house and made a whole documentary about it called Demon House. He claimed the place was so dangerous, he had to demolish it. If you ask anyone in law enforcement who the most powerful figure in Russian organized crime is, they'll probably mention Semyon Mogilevich. He was born in Kiev in 1946 and was still part of the Soviet Union, and over Over the years, he put together a criminal network that spread across Europe and North America. Money laundering, weapons trafficking, extortion, everything under the sun, operating in dozens of countries. One of the few times American authorities actually managed to charge him was through a company called YBM Magnex. In the 90s, this company claimed it was making industrial magnets, but it was a front. The FBI said investors were fed false financial records while the company's stock price was being artificially pumped up. And the whole thing fell apart in 1998. Investors had lost over $150 million. By 2003, the US government had charged Mogilevich with dozens of counts, including fraud and money laundering. A few years after that, he landed on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. But the thing that drives investigators crazy is that Mogilevich had spent most of his time living comfortably in Russia. Getting him extradited to the United States is basically not going to happen. So, the man who's widely considered the top boss of Russian organized crime has never once sat in an American courtroom. After the Soviet Union collapsed, the criminal world in Russia got extremely violent, and during that period, one name stood out above almost everyone else: Vyacheslav Ivankov. His nickname was Yaponchik, which roughly translates to Little Japanese, which sounds pretty silly, but there was nothing funny about this guy. Ivankov climbed through the ranks of the Russian underworld in the 80s and eventually earned the title of thief-in-law, a rank inside Russian organized crime reserved for the baddest of the bad. In the early 90s, Ivankov moved to the United States and set up in Brighton Beach, New York. American investigators believed he'd been sent there specifically to coordinate criminal activity across the country. He was accused of running an extortion operation that went after Russian business owners. In 1995, the FBI took him down. Prosecutors said he and his crew had demanded millions of dollars from a financial firm and threatened violence if it wasn't paid. He was convicted, spent nearly a decade locked up in the US, then got deported back to Russia. In 2009, he was sitting outside a restaurant in Moscow when he was sniped from across the street. He died a few weeks later. Gennady Petrov. Investigators say he helped build one of the most powerful criminal networks to come out of St. Petersburg in the 90s. Petrov is strongly tied to the Tambov crime group, which grew during the messy years right after the Soviet Union fell apart. At that time, entire industries were being sold off and enormous amounts of money were changing hands, and criminals were right there, mixing legitimate business deals with not so legitimate ones. Petrov is involved in money laundering, racketeering, narcotics trafficking, and arms smuggling. Spanish investigators spent years tracking him and eventually launched an operation in 2008. Petrov was arrested during that operation along with a bunch of his crew, but things were muddy. The criminal activity overlapped with what looked like totally normal business, but it was all being used to hide where the money was really coming from. But Petrov denied all of it and was later let out on bail. In 2010, a crime happened in Russia that genuinely shocked the entire country. Sergei Sapok was the leader of a violent crew operating in a small rural area in southern Russia. For years, people in that area had, quietly whispered about what was going on. Businesses being controlled, people being intimidated. It had been going on for a long time. But on November 4th, 2010, everything came to a head. That night, members of Sapok's crew broke into the home of a local farmer named Sergei Amatov. What happened inside was one of the most brutal mass killings in modern Russian history. 12 people were killed. The attackers tried to burn parts of the house down to get rid of the evidence. As investigators dug into the case, a much bigger picture started forming. People in the area had been reporting threats and violence for years, but police had basically looked the other way. Finally, Sapok and several of his crew were arrested and brought to trial. In 2013, he was sentenced to life in prison. 2 years later, in 2014, he died of a stroke in prison just after 3 of his accomplices took their own lives. Few people in Russian history caused as much fear as Andrei Chikatilo. He was a serial killer. His crimes spread terror through parts of the Soviet Union for more than a decade. Chikatilo was born in Ukraine in 1936, spent most of his life working as a teacher and a factory worker. From the outside, he looked completely ordinary, but between 1978 and 1990, he carried out a string of horrifying attacks targeting women and young people, many of them runaways or just traveling alone near train stations. He would approach them with offers of food or money. He would get them somewhere isolated and then attack them and wooded areas nearby. Investigators eventually connected him to at least 52 unalivings, so this guy was one of the most prolific serial killers in modern history. Finally, in 1990, police caught him during a surveillance operation near a train station. After his arrest, he confessed to dozens of the crimes. He was tried in 1992, convicted, and executed in 1994. In the late 80s and into the early 90s, Sergei Maduev became one of the most feared criminals in Russia. Born in 1956, he built a reputation not just as someone who committed violent crimes, but as someone who was calculated and methodical about it. He carried out violent robberies and unalivings across multiple cities. Investigators suspected him in the deaths of at least 10 people, the real number probably being much higher. One of the stories that made him particularly notorious involves a female investigator who was assigned to question him in prison. He reportedly manipulated and seduced her, and authorities believed it was part of a calculated plan to escape. So this guy wasn't just brutal, he was smart. Not a good combination. It made him especially hard to deal with. But he was convicted and sentenced to death, but he ended up dying in prison in 2006 after years of being locked up. Aslan Usoyan went by the nickname Grandpa Hassan. This man was considered one of the most powerful and feared figures in Russia for decades. Born in 1937 in Georgia, he built up an operation across Europe. He wasn't the type who got his hands dirty personally, though. He was a strategist who would pull the strings from a distance. He also had his hands in businesses that looked completely legit, which made it almost impossible to tie anything back to him. But in 2013, he met the same fate a lot of Russia's top criminals do, violently. He was hit at a restaurant in Moscow right in the middle of the day. This next one happened in 2008. Nikolai Ogolyobak used to be a choir boy, but somewhere along the way, he got drawn into Satanism and ended up leading a small cult. He and a few followers targeted teenagers in the local goth scene. It lured 4 of them into the woods about 300 miles northeast of Moscow. There, they forced the teens to drink before committing horrific acts against them. Police discovered the cult when body parts were found in Nikolai's apartment. He was arrested and received a measly 20-year sentence, which he didn't even have to complete. He was set free a few years ago after serving 6 months of military service in Ukraine. Sergei Timofeyev ran one of the most feared criminal organizations in Moscow during the 90s. This group came up during the years right after the Soviet Union fell apart. At the time, there was a power vacuum in both business and crime, and people like Timofeyev moved in to fill it. The organization was involved in extortion, protection rackets, violent robberies, and money laundering. But they weren't just street-level criminals running small operations. They controlled entire districts of Moscow. Anyone who refused to go along with them or got in their way often paid for it with their life. But Timofeyev himself became a major target during the criminal wars that were going on throughout Moscow at the time. Some pretty high-profile criminals were being taken out on a regular basis, often in public, in order to send a message. Well, in 1994, Timofeyev was killed with an explosive that was planted in his car. Alexander Litvinenko was a former officer in Russia's FSB, agency that came right after the KGB. He eventually defected to the United Kingdom and became one of the most outspoken critics of the Russian government. In the early 2000s, he started publicly accusing Russian intelligence and criminal networks of corruption and carrying out political hits, and that made him some very serious enemies. He was living in London under tight security, but it wasn't enough to keep him safe. In 2006, Litvinenko was poisoned with polonium-210, which is a radioactive substance that most people had never heard of at the time. It's rare to ever see, but man, was it a brutal way to go out. He died very slowly and painfully for the course of several weeks. Back in 2016, a Thai model named Thipawan, who also goes by Pui, went on a morning talk show and claimed she'd been possessed by a spirit for over a year. She said it was a pop, which in Thai folklore is basically a ghost that feeds on human organs. As you can imagine, this makes for an awkward guest. At first she was pretty calm, just explaining how she picked up the spirit while on a trip to Rayong, but halfway through the interview, something changes. Her voice, her mannerisms. She starts talking like she's not the one in control anymore, and the hosts quickly realize that something's wrong. The pop has taken over. They start trying to reason with the spirit, telling it to stop threatening people. Then one of the hosts pulls out a Buddha pendant. As soon as he holds it up, Pui completely loses it. She screams, flails, and recoils like someone threw acid at her. They end up putting the pendant around her neck, and then it just stops, like nothing happened. Shame she didn't think to do that before spending the year with an angry demon in her body. The whole thing went viral in Thailand. It's definitely one of the wildest things ever broadcast on Thai TV. That I know of. I don't watch Thai TV. In 1971, NBC aired something that had never really been done before on TV, an exorcism. Most audiences back then didn't even know what an exorcism was. I mean, sure, exorcisms had been around for a very long time, but they hadn't seeped into pop culture the way they have now. This was still 2 years before The Exorcist even came out, so to say audiences were shocked by this would be an understatement. The 6-minute segment documented the experiences of Edwin and Marcia Becker, a couple living in Chicago who claimed their home was haunted. Reporter Carol Simpson led the piece, which opened with an interview where the Beckers described unexplained activity in the house.
Cabinet doors were closing, doors were opening, doors were closing.
This past week, they said they were awakened by the sound of a woman crying. It came from the dining room, but there was no one in the house but themselves.
I hated to think of what it was, Edwin went on to say during the interview. After the Catholic Church declined to help them, the Beckers contacted the Independent Spiritualist Church in Chicago. The exorcism was performed by Reverend William Darrell Davis and Joseph DeLuise, a medium. Everyone in the house, including the news crew, was asked to wear crucifixes for protection. At one point, Reverend DeLuise entered a trance and claimed to channel the voice of a spirit, an old woman who spoke through him, saying something about a lock combination.
Remember, the combination. Why does it concern you? It's important to me. Why have you stayed here?
During the ritual, a strong gust of wind blew through the room, shaking the blinds, although that apparently happened off camera. The team also used a mirror, offered communion to the spirit, and spread blessed salt throughout the house. The broadcast ended with Simpson stating that the house had been quiet for several days since. In 2005, Channel 4 in the UK aired a show called The Exorcism, where they attempted a real exorcism on live television. A lot of viewers found it highly disturbing. The subject was a man named Colin, though, who claimed he was possessed by something that lived in his right foot. Apparently, this demonic foot spirit caused him to drive dangerously fast without being able to stop himself. That sounds like one of the worst excuses in court, but anyway, he tried everything else apparently, so Channel 4 decided to televise the exorcism to see if it would help. The network made a big deal out of this, calling it a scientific experiment and even bringing in psychiatrists and, of course, church officials to answer phones afterward in case viewers got freaked out. They did. Over 4,000 people called in after the broadcast. It ended up being one of Channel 4's most called about shows. During the actual exorcism, Colin didn't exactly start levitating or vomiting pea soup, but he did look tense and disturbed. And then after a bunch of prayers, he suddenly said, "That was the most relaxed deliverance I've ever had." So take from that what you will. If anyone has more information on this airing though, like if you actually saw it live, please share your thoughts down in the comments. Back in the early 90s, ABC's 2020 aired a segment that freaked a lot of people out as well. It featured a teenage girl named Gina being exorcised by a group of Pentecostal ministers. It was filmed and broadcast nationwide in 1991 for millions to see. The footage is pretty distressing. Gina was clearly not in a good way, eyes rolling, voice growling, body convulsing. She screams, jerks violently, and starts shouting things in this deep, raspy voice. According to the ministers, she was possessed by several entities, two of which were named Zion and Minga. Ministers surrounded her, prayed, and yelled for the entities to come out. Eventually, everything settles down and the demons are supposedly exorcised. Whether you believe in this or not, the footage is kinda disturbing. From what I can tell, this was not a staged segment. Even if it was just emotional overload or religious hysteria, it's sad watching a young girl go through something like this, all in front of cameras too. There's never been an update on Gina either. She ended up in psychiatric care soon after this segment aired. As for what she's up to now, if she's okay, we don't know. On August 19th, 1987, a man named Gary Stolman managed to get inside NBC's Burbank studio during the 4 p.m. news. At one point during the broadcast, he walked up behind reporter David Horowitz, pulled out a firearm and forced him to read a bizarre statement live on air.
What is this? Let me see what it says.
Now, to say Gary Stolman was possessed here is a stretch, but he was in this eerily calm state considering the circumstances. He's almost robotic. It's very odd, and to the reporter's credit, he stayed pretty calm too, way more than I would have. He just started reading the paper, which was filled with wild claims about the CIA, mind control, and mental hospitals.
In 1981, by someone with connections at the CIA.
After the manifesto was read, Stolman just casually placed the firearm on the desk. Anchor John Beard quickly grabbed it, and security took Stolman into custody. Turns out, it wasn't even a real firearm. It was an unloaded BB. Very strange incident though. Sean Sellers had a very troubled upbringing. His mother was very young when she had him, and his father wasn't really in the picture. His grandfather and uncle also put him through severe mistreatment. On several occasions, Sellers' uncle would force him to wear soiled diapers on his head just to humiliate him. By the time he was in 10th grade, he and his family had moved 30 times. Sellers began taking a keen interest in the occult and claimed to have been possessed by a demon on March 5th, 1986, when he snuck into his mother and stepfather's room with a firearm and killed them both. According to him, he'd also carried out an occult-like ritual before deciding to take their lives. The year before this, he'd killed a Circle K convenience store clerk, Robert Paul Bauer, because he'd refused to sell him beer. In 1986, he was sentenced to death for his crimes, making him the youngest criminal ever sentenced to death in America since 1976, a record he still holds to this day. His death sentence wasn't carried out until 1999. In his 13 years in jail, he'd become a born-again Christian, and just 2 days before his death, Sellers wrote in his diary that he was amazed at the, quote, self-righteousness he still encountered from people who didn't know him. Going on to write, "People, for one moment, get your eyes off my sins and look at your own. You want to harp on something that happened 13 years ago. 13 years. In February of 2016, Jason Dalton, who was working as an Uber driver in Kalamazoo, Michigan, went on a shocking spree that left 6 people dead and 2 others injured. What makes this case particularly unsettling is the way Dalton tried to explain his actions during police interrogations. On the night of his spree, Dalton picked up and dropped off passengers, and in between doing this, randomly started shooting at people on the street. He killed 62-year-old Mary Lou Nye, her sister-in-law Joe, 74-year-old Dorothy Brown, 68-year-old Barbara Hawthorne, and father and son Richard and Tyler Smith. When police questioned him, Dalton claimed that the Uber app had somehow taken over his mind and body, stating, "I know you guys are gonna have a hard time believing this, but it literally took over my mind and body." He then described seeing symbols, including the Eastern Star and a horned devil head that would appear on his phone. Dalton received life in prison for his crimes. On September 10th of 2015, a body was discovered in an abandoned car in the Whitestone area of Queens, New York. The victim was 28-year-old Angie Escobar. The medical examiner determined that Angie had been killed about 4 days before her body was found. The New York Police Department quickly identified Luis Zambrano as the prime suspect. He was arrested on September 18th after fleeing to Virginia, but he didn't take long to confess to the crime. Zambrano admitted that he had attacked Angie with a pair of scissors after she told him she wanted to break up. Zambrano also claimed that he'd been possessed by a demon at the time of the attack. In April 2016, he was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 20 years in prison. On top of that, he was also convicted of an unrelated burglary charge, which added another 3 years to his sentence. I wonder if Satan told him to do that as well. Peter Kürten, often referred to as the Vampire of Dusseldorf, one of the most notorious serial killers in German history, active from February to November of 1929 in the city of Dusseldorf. He had a fascination with people's red bodily fluids and would often drink the BLOOD of his victims, hence his nickname. He carried out several brutal killings and other very disturbing crimes I can't really get into detail on. When he was finally apprehended though, Kürten confessed to his crimes in detail, describing how he felt exhilarated during his crimes. Ultimately, he was convicted and sentenced to beheading in 1931. Between 1976 and 1977, David Berkowitz, aka the Son of Sam, terrorized New York City with a series of shootings that left 6 people dead and several others injured. One of the strangest parts about the Son of Sam case, though, was Berkowitz's bizarre claim that a demonic dog was instructing him to commit his crimes. He believed this dog, belonging to a neighbor, was possessed and sent by the devil to give him orders. Berkowitz's letters to the police and the media were filled with all these cryptic messages and references to his supposed connection with the supernatural. He also said he was in a satanic cult. During his arrest, he infamously stated that he was just following orders from this demonic entity in the dog. And the Son of Sam became a name that would haunt headlines for years. After his capture, Berkowitz was diagnosed with various mental health issues, but he continued to insist that he was acting under the influence of some sort of evil force. In 1978, he pled guilty to his crimes and was given 6 consecutive 25 years to life sentences, 1 for each of his crimes. He's still alive and in prison to this day. Alright, so we've talked a lot about death, some very disturbing stuff. Let's take a moment to watch this glorious moment play out. This takes Wedding Crashers to a whole other level. Some dude had apparently come in off the street to flash everyone during a wedding ceremony. To some, mainly I'm gonna guess the bride and groom, this man is the epitome of evil. To others, this man is an absolute godsend. Weddings are boring. The problem is it's this long drawn out process, but we all know how it's gonna end. You're gonna get married. Why not throw a little twist in there? I also really appreciate this man's presentation. Like, he reveals himself like an angel sent from the heavens, like BAM! Look at me. The way he just opens those doors, or whatever you call those there. Doesn't even leave immediately. He just stands there for like a while. Must have felt like an eternity to all the lucky people who were there to witness this in person. So this dude was exploring an abandoned church when he came across this. Certainly not something I'd ever want to see while exploring an abandoned church. Then again though, what exactly would I like to find while exploring an abandoned church? I don't know. I mean, you're either gonna find nothing or something bad. Some might find this dude's screaming comical, and I can definitely see that. At the same time though, it doesn't sound unrealistic necessarily. I mean, how are you supposed to react if coming across something like this in an abandoned church? Of course you're gonna scream and say some silly stuff, you know? Oh my god, what is that? I'd probably say that. I can imagine myself probably, you know, acting the same way. What do you think of this video though? Was this guy genuinely scared, or was this just a hoax? From TikToker Anelli_RG comes this disturbing video taken in church in Mexico. Apparently she'd always gotten this weird, off-putting, uneasy feeling while she was at church. And one day she decided to film during mass and picked up someone or something on camera that she didn't remember seeing in person. Take a look. In her description, she wrote that this thing was not human. And by the looks of it, I definitely agree. That is what I'd call a ghoul. Is this just poor camera quality? Well, maybe that might have something to do with it, but everyone else looks pretty normal. Whatever this thing is, it clearly stands out. The pale skin, the black pits where its eyes should be, it looks like the type of thing you'd see standing on someone's lawn as a Halloween decoration, but instead, it's just mingling with the crowd at church, swaying to the music, like, don't mind me, just a ghoul hanging at church. Maybe it's not that bad after all, who knows, but it looks bad. Alright, well this looks like a scene out of The Exorcist, which is never a good thing. Just what in the hell is going on here? This video was apparently captured in Malaysia and shows a woman climbing the wall of a church in a really creepy, unnatural way. Not that climbing the wall of a church would ever be natural, but you know what I mean. It's the way she moves. It just doesn't look human. She looks like she's been possessed by a spider. And not Spider-Man. I'm talking about a real spider. She moves like an arachnid. Just an eerie piece of footage, real or not. Alright, this next case is absolutely nuts. This is Pastor Tracy Burleson. On May 18th, 2010, Burleson claimed that his wife Pauletta was shot dead while he was away making a brief errand and then he came home to find her. Now initially it seemed like this was just a tragic random event, but this was in no way random, and this pastor was in no way innocent. Prosecutors found that Burleson had actually orchestrated a kill for hire scheme to get rid of his wife so that he could collect on a $60,000 life insurance policy. And even crazier, Burleson's son William was involved. How involved was he though? Well, he was the guy his father hired to do the job. Insane, but even weirder, this is just like ick. Burleson and his son were having affairs with the same woman. I don't know, why does that make me creeped out the most? Anyway, and this woman also assisted William by driving him to clean up and dispose of the weapon he used to carry out the killing. In 2011, Pastor Burleson was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Is this footage of a real ghost? Take a look. Did you catch that? It looks like this translucent red shape walks from right to left and then kneels at the altar before disappearing. It's pretty clear, which I really like. It's rare to see in supposed ghost videos. Unfortunately, what we still have here though is the hallmark of all ghost videos, the bad camera work. It looks like whoever's filming was just spun around on one of those spinny things at the playground. As for what this red entity could be, is it the ghost of someone who used to visit the church? Is it a former priest? Something darker perhaps? Is this video even genuine? Who knows? But that's what I like about mysterious videos like this online. It's the unknown. They could be hoaxes, but there's that part of your brain that's like, maybe. In 2001, Manuela and Daniel Ruda, a couple, committed a very horrific crime. They were responsible for the death of their very own friend, Frank Hackert. They believed Hackert was so amusing that he would make the perfect court jester for Satan. The Rudas were deeply involved in occult practices and would apparently sleep in graveyards and go to devil-worshipping ceremonies. And you know what? Nothing wrong with liking spooky stuff, just as long as it doesn't go too far. And in this case, it definitely did. Their fascination with the occult ended in a series of violent rituals that they subjected their friend to, ultimately leading to his death. After killing him, they placed his body in a coffin that they were using as a coffee table. They even attempted to dismember his remains, but were then caught before they could fully dispose of the evidence. In 2002, both Manuela and Daniel were convicted of the crime. Daniel was sentenced to prison, while Manuela was committed to a psychiatric institution. Richard Ramirez, known as the Night Stalker, one of the most infamous serial killers in American history. Unlike most serial killers, Ramirez's crimes were very random. There's just no clear pattern to his method other than brutality for the sake of brutality. He'd attack men, women, old, young. He's responsible for a ton of home invasions, violent attacks, SA, and of course, killings. He also viewed himself as a servant of Satan, leaving symbols of the occult at his crime scenes like pentagrams. During his trial, he famously flashed a pentagram tattoo on his palm, claiming his allegiance to the devil. He believed that he was carrying out the will of Satan, claiming that his acts were a form of worship. He often used the phrase "Satan is great" to justify his actions. Gilles de Rais was born in 1405 in France. He's known for a lot of things. He was a wealthy nobleman, a knight, a leader in the French army during the 100 Years' War, a good friend of Joan of Arc, and one of the most prolific serial killers in history. Around 1432, Gilles de Rais began withdrawing from society, pursuing some of his darker hobbies in secret. And it was at this time that, coincidentally, boys around his castle began to go missing. And when witnesses started noticing bodies being buried by Gilles de Rais' staff members, it became pretty clear that something very dark was going on, but no one was prepared for how truly disturbing things would turn out to be. Well, it turned out Gilles de Rais had a slight obsession with the occult, especially alchemy. In medieval Europe, alchemy was often viewed as a form of black magic. Gilles ended up employing an alchemist from Tuscany named Francois Prelati, who claimed to have a special connection to a demonic entity he called a baron. Prelati promised that he could summon this spirit to help Gilles with his magical practices. He began providing Prelati with body parts from his young victims, gruesome offerings that would apparently help conjure this demonic entity. It didn't work, and Gilles de Rais was executed for his crimes on October 26th of 1440. He'd taken the lives of 140 boys, possibly and probably far more than that. In 2015, in the small town of Dudley, England, a 65-year-old pensioner named Peter Churn was attacked by a young man named Tommy Smith, who later claimed that he'd been possessed by a demon. In reality though, Smith just wanted the old man's Range Rover. Peter Churn was in his garage when this possessed Smith wildly attacked him with a blade. The attack was so vicious that his weapon actually snapped in two. Miraculously, Churn survived the attack but suffered a stroke as a result and was blinded in one eye, along with having several slash and stab wounds to his head, chest, neck, back, and ears. Churn later said in court that Tommy Smith had been waving the blade around like a kung fu sword. The old man managed to fight Smith off though. He started pressing on the guy's eyes but blacked out after that from his injuries obviously. Luckily his son came out of the house though, at which point the devil-possessed blade wielder took off running. The court obviously didn't believe his whole possession story, but instead of prison, Tommy was sentenced to a mental health hospital for the foreseeable future. If I wished I could pay a visit to your city every night, at will I could slay thousands of your best citizens, for I am in close relationship with the angel of death. That's just one line from a letter published in the paper on March 13th, 1919, written by a man calling himself the Axeman, one of the first modern-day serial killers. The Axeman claimed to be a demon who resided in hell, and his letter acted as a warning to the people of New Orleans that he would kill again if people didn't blare jazz music from their homes on the night of March 19th. Well, the 19th came around, and sure enough, jazz was heard in every home and dance hall throughout the night, and no one was killed. The identity of this mysterious Axeman was never found, but he took the lives of 6 people, leaving 6 others injured, between May of 1918 and October of 1919. Many of his victims were Italian immigrants. He'd quietly sneak into people's homes in the dead of night, bludgeoning them with his axe. Then, as suddenly as the killings began, they just stopped.
Next up, we have Kenneth McDuff, a man who was sentenced to death after killing 3 young women, only to be paroled in 1989, arrested again for parole violations, released again, and then arrested again after killing yet another young woman. How do you end up on death row only to get out and kill more people? It's insanity. McDuff was first convicted on August 6 of 1966 after violating 3 young women whom he then killed with a broomstick. Thus the killings became known as the broomstick killings. For his crimes, Kenneth was given the death sentence, while his partner in crime, Roy Dale Green, was sentenced to just 25 years. Green was released in 1979, and in 1972, McDuff's sentence was actually overturned due to the Supreme Court abolishing capital punishment. In 1989, McDuff was released from jail due to severe overcrowding taking place in Texas prisons. Big mistake. Shortly after his arrest, he was arrested for a series of parole violations but released shortly after due to previously mentioned overcrowding. It wasn't until 1992 that McDuff was arrested for the last time after killing a young woman in Texas, and at this time the death penalty had been reinstated, and so McDuff was once again sentenced to death, a sentence carried out finally on November 17th of 1998. Next up, we have Andre Chikatilo, who between the years of 1978 and 1999 violated and killed at least 53 people, although he was only tried for the violation and killing of 53, but he claimed to have killed over 56. On the evening of December 22nd in 1978, Chikatilo targeted a young woman named Yelena Zakotnova. After the attack, he was questioned by police who had received word that Chikatilo had been the last person to see Zakotnova alive. He could have gone to jail right there and then, but his wife provided him with an alibi, and instead 25-year-old Alexander Kravchenko was arrested and sentenced to death in his place. For a while, Chikatilo kept a low profile, as there are no documented killings at his hands until 1981, when he violated and killed another young woman. After that, he became relentless, targeting both men and women, just any chance he got. He would befriend them at train stations and bus stops and lure them into forests and bushes. He would attack them, violate them, kill them, and then inflict further damage to, and sometimes even ingest, part of their bodies. As his victim count rose, so did police surveillance. Eventually, Chikatilo was arrested as a person of interest, but there was not enough evidence to try him in a court of law. He did, however, spend 3 months in jail during this time for a number of minor offenses. After he was released, released, he once again kept a low profile. Until 1985, that is, when he began killing once again, taking the lives of at least 21 more individuals. Chikatilo was arrested for the last time on November 20th of 1990, and this time he confessed to his crimes, all 56 of them, 52 of which were independently verified. He was sentenced to death, carried out on February 14th of 1994. Happy Valentine's Day. Next up, we have Arthur Shawcross, who was first arrested in October of 1979 for arson. Prior to this, Arthur had claimed to have partaken in the killing and consumption of 2 women while serving overseas in Vietnam, but there was no proof and therefore no charges were filed. They should have believed him. In 1971, Arthur was released from prison, and just 1 year later he killed his young neighbor and then married his third wife, Penny Sherbino. It was a short-lived relationship. 5 months later, the body of his first and second victim were located. He became a suspect, and in 1972, Arthur was arrested. He received a 25-year life sentence, but of course, he only served 15. In April of 1987, he was released on parole. For a while, Arthur decided to lay low, but unfortunately not for long. From 1988 to 1989, victims, many of which, but not all, were working women of the night, were turning up dead all over town. Eventually, police were able to identify Arthur by a necklace belonging to one of the deceased workers that was found in the possession of his girlfriend, Clara. Not wanting her implicated in the killings, he confessed to the killings, and even to 2 others that the police had not yet been aware of. He was put on trial in 1990 and given 11 consecutive life sentences. He died in 2008 of cardiac arrest. His heart probably couldn't take the atrocities any longer. Next up, we have Duane Little, who was incredibly little when he committed his first major crime, killing and violating in the first degree. Despite his young age and due to the gruesome nature of the crime, Little was sentenced to life in prison. Unfortunately, he was paroled at 21 after serving just the minimum 8 years. Big mistake. That same year, shortly after Little's release, an entire family, the Cowdens, went missing from their campsite in Applegate, Oregon. Their bodies were later found inside of a cave in the area, and all evidence pointed to none other than Duane Little. Unfortunately, however, there wasn't actually enough evidence for a trial, and Little refused to confess to his crime. It wasn't until 1979 that he would again be arrested after violating, impaling, and attempting to kill a female hitchhiker with a bun in the oven. He was given 2 life sentences for this crime. Once in jail, he finally confessed to killing the Cowden family, but for some reason he was never charged with it, and to this day the case remains open. And finally, we have Daniel Joe Hiddle, who on April 4th of 1973, at a young age of just 23, took the life of both of his adopted parents inside of their family home. Why? Because their dog scratched his car. Daniel was given a 30-year sentence for his crimes, but was granted parole in 1984, just 11 years after the death of his adopted parents. Care to venture a guess about what he did once he got out? If you said killing spree, congratulations, people suck. On November 15th of 1989, Daniel killed an officer who had pulled him over for speeding before going on to kill his dealer, 2 young men, and his daughter. He was later arrested, tried, convicted, and sentenced to death for his crimes, a sentence carried out on December 6th of 2000.